Rain poured over the city that night, the kind of rain that made streets empty and lonely. Inside a grand mansion behind high walls, a birthday party was supposed to be happening. Candles stood ready on an untouched cake. Expensive decorations hung from the ceiling. But the chairs around the long dining table remained empty. Vincent Moretti sat alone at the head of the table, still dressed in his sharp black suit, staring at the cake nobody had bothered to light. Vincent was one of the most powerful mafia bosses in the city. Men feared his name. Rivals trembled when they heard he was coming. But tonight, on his birthday, none of that power meant anything. His family had scattered years ago, torn apart by old conflicts and grudges. His men were loyal in business, but not in friendship. Nobody had remembered. Nobody had cared enough to show up. Marco, his most trusted man, walked in quietly, holding a phone to his ear, deep in some urgent conversation about a shipment problem. He glanced at Vincent sitting alone, gave a small, awkward nod, and quickly left the room again, too busy with business to notice his boss's silence. Vincent stood up slowly, pushing the chair back with a quiet scrape against the marble floor. He looked at the cake one more time, the candles still unlit, and walked away without saying a word. He grabbed a plain black coat from the hallway closet, something simple, nothing that showed his usual wealth or status. He needed to disappear for a while, just be a normal man walking the streets, away from the empty mansion and the hollow feeling in his chest. Outside, the rain hit him immediately, cold and relentless. He pulled his hood up and walked without any real direction, his hands deep in his coat pockets. The city lights blurred through the rain, and for the first time in years, Vincent Moretti felt truly small, truly alone, despite all his power and money. He walked for what felt like hours, his shoes soaked, his body shivering from the cold. The streets grew quieter, moving from the busy downtown area into a simpler, working-class neighborhood filled with small houses and modest apartment buildings. He didn't know exactly where he was anymore, and honestly, he didn't care. Thunder cracked loudly above him, and the rain suddenly grew heavier, pouring down in thick sheets. Vincent looked around desperately for any shelter, spotting a small house with a covered porch just ahead. Without thinking much about it, he rushed toward it, standing under the small roof, trying to escape the worst of the storm. His body shook from the cold, and before he could stop himself, his hand knocked on the door, seeking any kind of warmth or help. Inside the small house, Grace Bennett was in the kitchen, humming softly while decorating a simple homemade cake with pink frosting. Her 7-year-old son, Ethan, sat at the table nearby, drawing pictures with crayons, occasionally looking up excitedly at the cake meant for his own small birthday celebration tomorrow. Grace was a plus-size single mother, working 2 jobs just to give her son a decent life after his father left years ago. She wasn't rich. She wasn't glamorous. But her home was always warm, always full of love, no matter how tight money became some months. The sudden knock on the door startled her. She glanced at the clock, almost 9 at night, and the storm outside sounded fierce. "Who could that be in this weather?" she muttered, wiping her hands on her apron before walking toward the door. Ethan looked up from his drawing, curious. "Mom, is that Uncle Jerry?" "I don't think so, baby. Stay right there," Grace said gently, motioning for him to remain seated. She opened the door carefully, and there, standing on her porch, soaked completely from the rain, was a tall stranger, his face partially hidden under a dripping hood, his body visibly shivering from the cold. For a moment, Grace hesitated. Common sense told her to be careful, to ask questions before inviting a stranger inside her home, especially with her young son nearby. But something in the man's exhausted, lonely eyes made her hesitate for a different reason entirely. He looked broken somehow, lost in a way that had nothing to do with simply being caught in the rain. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, concern immediately replacing her initial caution. Vincent looked up slowly, meeting her kind, worried eyes. He hadn't expected genuine concern from anyone, especially not a complete stranger opening her door late at night, during a storm. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said quietly, his voice rough from the cold. "I just needed shelter from the rain for a moment." Grace studied him carefully for just a second longer, noticing his soaked, expensive-looking coat, his tired posture, and the strange sadness hidden behind his eyes. Despite every warning bell in her mind telling her to be cautious, her heart made the decision before her mind could argue further. "Come in," she said simply, stepping aside to let him through her doorway. "You'll catch a cold standing out there." Vincent stared at her for a moment, stunned by the unexpected kindness from a complete stranger, kindness he hadn't experienced from his own people in years. Slowly, hesitantly, he stepped inside, completely unaware that this small, humble house was about to change his entire lonely existence forever. Vincent stepped inside, water dripping from his coat onto the small welcome mat. The house was warm, filled with the comforting smell of vanilla and fresh cake. It felt like nothing he had experienced in years, simple, genuine, alive with quiet happiness. "You can hang your coat right there," Grace said, pointing to a hook near the door. "I'll grab you a towel." She disappeared briefly into a hallway, while Vincent stood awkwardly near the entrance, glancing around the small living room. Family photos covered the walls, a young boy at different ages, birthday parties, school events, moments of genuine happiness captured in simple frames. Nothing like the cold, formal portraits hanging in his own mansion. Ethan peeked curiously from the kitchen doorway, studying the tall stranger with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom, who is that?" "Just someone caught in the storm, sweetheart," Grace called back, returning with a soft towel, handing it to Vincent. "Here, dry off a little." "Thank you," Vincent said quietly, taking the towel and wiping the rain from his face and hands. "I really am sorry to intrude like this." "Nonsense," Grace said, waving her hand dismissively. "Nobody should be out in weather like this. Come sit down, warm up a bit." She led him toward the small kitchen table, where Ethan quickly scooted his crayons aside, still watching the stranger with curious eyes. Vincent sat down carefully, feeling strangely out of place in this warm, humble setting, yet somehow more comfortable than he had felt in his own grand dining room earlier that night. Grace moved to the stove, checking a pot of soup simmering there. "It's not fancy," she said, glancing back at him, "but I've got some vegetable soup if you'd like some. Warm you up from the inside." "I couldn't ask you to," Vincent began, but Grace was already ladling soup into a bowl. "You didn't ask," she said with a small smile. "I'm offering." She placed a warm bowl in front of him along with a piece of bread. Vincent stared at the simple meal for a moment, genuinely moved by the gesture. Nobody had offered him something so simple, so genuine, in longer than he could remember. Every gift he usually received came with hidden expectations, favors owed, strategic advantages sought. This woman wanted nothing from him at all. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't expected to feel. As he ate, Ethan continued watching him curiously. "Are you having a bad day, mister?" the young boy asked innocently. Vincent paused, surprised by the direct question. "Actually," he said slowly, "today is my birthday." Grace looked up from wiping the counter, surprise clear on her face. "Your birthday? And you're wandering alone in the rain?" Vincent gave a small, humorless laugh. "Something like that." Grace studied him for a moment, sensing there was a much deeper story behind his simple words, but she didn't push for details. Instead, she glanced at the small homemade cake sitting on the counter, originally meant for Ethan's birthday celebration the following day. "Well," she said, walking over and picking up the cake carefully, "it just so happens we have an extra birthday cake right here. Ethan's birthday is tomorrow, but I think we can spare a candle for tonight too." "Oh no, I couldn't," Vincent said quickly, though something in his chest ached with a strange, hopeful warmth. "That's your son's cake." "Ethan," Grace said, turning to her son with a warm smile, "would you mind sharing your birthday cake with our guest tonight? Just one candle, just for him." Ethan grinned brightly, nodding enthusiastically. "Sure, everybody should have candles on their birthday." Grace placed a single candle on the edge of the cake, lighting it carefully with a match from the kitchen drawer. The small flame flickered warmly in the dim kitchen light. "Make a wish," Grace said softly, smiling gently at Vincent. Vincent stared at the small flame, overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. This stranger, this humble woman with nothing to gain, had given him more genuine warmth in 10 minutes than his own family and men had given him in years of loyalty and business. He closed his eyes briefly, made a quiet wish, and blew out the candle. Ethan clapped happily. "Happy birthday, mister." "Thank you," Vincent said, his voice unusually soft, genuine gratitude clear in his tired eyes. "This means more than you know." For the next few minutes, they sat together simply, sharing cake and quiet conversation about nothing important. Favorite foods, Ethan's school, simple everyday topics that Vincent hadn't discussed with anyone in years. It felt strange, comforting, and entirely unfamiliar all at once. Suddenly, a loud, urgent knock echoed from the front door, breaking the peaceful moment instantly. Grace looked up, startled, glancing nervously toward the door. "Are you expecting someone?" Vincent asked, his relaxed posture immediately shifting into alertness, years of danger instantly returning to his instincts. "No," Grace said, confusion clear on her face. "Nobody comes by this late." Vincent stood quickly, moving protectively between Grace, Ethan, and the front door, old habits taking control immediately. He walked cautiously toward the door and opened it carefully. Standing outside, soaked from the rain, was Marco, his face filled with relief and urgency the moment he spotted his boss. "Sir, thank God we found you," Marco said quickly, glancing nervously past Vincent toward Grace and Ethan, clearly confused by the domestic scene behind him. "We've been searching everywhere. You can't just disappear like that, not with the current threats against us." Grace's eyes widened with sudden fear and confusion, looking between Vincent and the urgent stranger at her door. "Threats? Sir, who exactly are you?" Vincent turned slowly toward Grace, his expression heavy with reluctance, realizing the peaceful moment he had just experienced was about to change entirely. "Grace," he said quietly, guilt evident in his tired eyes, "there's something important I need to explain to you." Grace stood frozen near the kitchen counter, her eyes shifting nervously between Vincent and the urgent stranger at her door. Ethan, sensing the sudden tension, moved closer to his mother, gripping the edge of her apron. "Explain what exactly?" Grace asked carefully, her voice steady despite the fear building inside her chest. Marco glanced at Vincent, unsure whether to speak in front of strangers. Vincent sighed heavily, running a hand through his damp hair, knowing there was no way to avoid the truth any longer. "My name is Vincent Moretti," he said slowly, watching Grace's face carefully for her reaction. "I run a large organization in this city, the kind of organization involved in dangerous business that has made me many enemies over the years." Grace's breath caught. She had heard that name before, whispered occasionally on local news broadcasts, always connected to serious crimes, violence, and danger. Her heart pounded as pieces started falling into place. The expensive coat, the sudden tension, the urgent man now standing nervously at her door. "You're the Mafia Boss," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. She instinctively pulled Ethan closer to her side. "Yes," Vincent admitted quietly, no longer able to hide behind simple lies or partial truths. Fear flickered across Grace's face, quickly followed by protective anger. "You should have told me the moment you stepped inside my house. My son was sitting right here." "You're right," Vincent said, guilt heavy in his voice. "I should have. I'm sorry. I never meant to put you or Ethan in any danger. I was simply looking for shelter from the storm, nothing more. I never expected any of this." Marco stepped forward slightly, his voice serious. "Sir, we really do need to leave. It's not safe for you to remain in an unknown location, especially with the recent tension building among rival families." Grace's eyes widened further at the mention of rival families, her grip on Ethan's shoulder tightening protectively. "Rival families? Are there people out there who would hurt you? Hurt us just because you were here?" Vincent hesitated, unwilling to lie to her further after everything she had unknowingly given him that night. "It's possible," he admitted honestly. "My enemies watch my movements carefully. If they discover I was here, even briefly, it could potentially put you and Ethan at risk." Grace's face paled, fear evident despite her attempts to remain calm for her son's sake. "Ethan, sweetheart, go to your room for a moment, okay?" she said gently, guiding her confused son toward the hallway. Once Ethan disappeared into his room, Grace turned back to Vincent, her arms crossed protectively, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear, confusion, and quiet anger. I welcomed you into my home. I shared my son's birthday cake with you. And this whole time, you were hiding something this dangerous. I understand your anger, Vincent said quietly, genuine regret clear in his tired eyes. You didn't deserve to be pulled into any of this. Your kindness tonight was the first genuine kindness I've experienced in years, and I repaid it poorly by not being honest from the start. Grace studied him carefully, torn between her instinctive fear and the memory of his genuine gratitude just minutes earlier, sharing a simple birthday candle with her son. Despite everything, she sensed no true malice in him, only loneliness and quiet sadness hidden behind a powerful, dangerous reputation. What happens now? She asked finally, her voice softer, though still guarded. We leave immediately, Marco answered quickly before Vincent could respond. The less time we spend here, the safer it is for everyone involved. Vincent nodded slowly in agreement, though something in his chest ached at the thought of leaving this warm, genuine home behind, returning once again to his cold, empty mansion. He looked at Grace one final time. Thank you for tonight, he said sincerely, for the shelter, the soup, the cake, and Ethan's kindness. It meant more than you'll ever know. I'm sorry for bringing danger anywhere near your family. Grace hesitated, watching him carefully, still uncertain about everything she had just learned, yet unable to deny the genuine sadness and gratitude evident in his tired eyes. Just be careful, she finally said quietly, surprising even herself with the genuine concern in her voice despite everything. Vincent nodded once, grateful for her unexpected kindness even now, before following Marco quickly out into the storm once again, disappearing into the darkness just as suddenly as he had appeared. Meanwhile, across the city, in a dimly lit underground club, a rival mafia leader named Salvatore Greco sat quietly, reviewing surveillance photos spread across his table. His men had been tracking Vincent's usual movements carefully, searching for any weakness, any opportunity to strike against their powerful rival. He disappeared for hours tonight, one of Salvatore's men reported nervously. Completely off the grid, no bodyguards, no security detail. We tracked him briefly to a residential area before losing him again. Salvatore's eyes narrowed with interest, a slow, calculating smile spreading across his face. Interesting. Vincent Moretti, wandering alone, unprotected, on his own birthday. Find out exactly where he went. Find out who he was with. Already on it, the man replied. Our source mentioned a woman, a single mother, lives alone with her young son in a quiet neighborhood. Salvatore leaned back thoughtfully, considering this new information carefully. A weakness, he murmured quietly to himself. Everyone has one eventually. Find this woman. Find out everything about her. If Vincent cares for her, even slightly, she could be exactly the leverage we need. Back at Grace's modest home, unaware of the danger now quietly gathering against her, she stood by her window, watching the storm continue outside, her mind replaying the strange, emotional encounter she had just experienced. She had no idea that helping a stranger on a rainy night had just placed her and her son directly into the dangerous crosshairs of the city's deadliest rivalry. 2 days passed since the storm. Vincent sat in his office at the mansion, staring at a folder Marco had just placed on his desk. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy images of Salvatore's men parked outside a familiar small house, watching quietly from a distance. They found her, Vincent said quietly, his jaw tightening with anger and guilt. We caught them watching the neighborhood yesterday, Marco confirmed grimly. They haven't approached her directly yet, but it's only a matter of time. Salvatore knows exactly what he's doing. Vincent closed his eyes briefly, frustration and worry battling inside him. He had tried to convince himself over the past 2 days that walking away from Grace's house had been enough, that his brief visit wouldn't cause any lasting consequences. But he had underestimated how closely his enemies watched his every move, especially any unusual behavior. I need to warn her, Vincent said, standing up immediately. Sir, think carefully, Marco said cautiously. If you go back there yourself, you'll only confirm exactly what Salvatore suspects. you'll be leading him straight to her, practically painting a target on her door. Vincent paused, torn between his instinct to protect Grace directly and Marco's practical warning. Then what do you suggest? Increase distant security around her home without her knowledge, Marco offered. Watch carefully, but keep your distance. If Salvatore's men make any direct move, we intervene immediately. Vincent nodded slowly, though every instinct in him wanted to personally ensure Grace and Ethan's safety. He had caused this danger, however unintentionally, and the guilt weighed heavily on him. Meanwhile, unaware of the danger quietly surrounding her home, Grace continued her normal routine, working her shifts at the local grocery store, picking Ethan up from school, preparing his actual birthday celebration that weekend. Yet something felt different lately. An unfamiliar car parked occasionally down the street, strange glances from unfamiliar faces in her usually quiet neighborhood. She dismissed it initially as simple paranoia following the shocking revelation about her mysterious visitor. But the feeling of being watched grew stronger, impossible to ignore completely. One evening, walking home from the bus stop with Ethan after school, Grace noticed the same dark car parked near the corner of her street. Two men sitting quietly inside, watching her house carefully. Her heart raced with sudden fear, memories of Vincent's warning echoing clearly in her mind. "Mom, why are we walking so fast?" Ethan asked, struggling to keep up with her hurried pace. "Just excited to get home, sweetheart." Grace lied gently, gripping his hand a little tighter, hurrying him quickly inside once they reached their door. That night, after Ethan was safely asleep, Grace sat anxiously in her living room, debating whether to call the police or simply ignore what she had seen. Before she could decide, a soft knock came at her door, cautious and quiet, unlike the urgent knock from Marco days earlier. She peeked through the window carefully, surprised to see Vincent standing alone on her porch, his expression serious and worried. She opened the door hesitantly. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered urgently. "Someone's been watching my house." "I know," Vincent said quietly, stepping inside quickly once she waved him in. "That's exactly why I came. I need to explain what's happening, and I need you to trust me, even though I understand if you don't." Grace crossed her arms, fear and frustration clear in her expression. "You need to explain quickly, Vincent. My son is upstairs sleeping, and there are strange men watching my house because of you. A rival organization discovered I visited your home that night," Vincent explained honestly. "They believe you might be important to me, a weakness they could use against me. I promise you, I've had my men watching carefully to protect you, but I understand now that ignoring this problem any longer isn't fair to you or Ethan." Grace's fear intensified at his blunt honesty, yet she also recognized the genuine concern behind his words. "What do you suggest we do?" she asked finally, exhaustion evident in her tired voice. "I could offer additional protection," Vincent said carefully. "Guard stationed nearby. Careful surveillance to ensure nothing happens to you or Ethan. Or, if you prefer, I could stay away completely, cut all contact, and hope Salvatore loses interest once he realizes you mean nothing to me." Grace studied him carefully, sensing the pain those last words caused him, despite his attempt to appear indifferent. She thought about the lonely, genuine man who had shared her son's birthday candle just days earlier, clearly moved by simple kindness he hadn't experienced in years. "And if I don't want you to stay away?" she asked quietly, surprising herself with her own honesty. Vincent looked up, genuine surprise evident in his tired eyes. "Grace, this world is dangerous. I don't want to pull you and Ethan deeper into it." "You already have," Grace said softly, though without real anger. "Whether you intended it or not, we're already involved now. I'd rather face this with proper protection and honesty, instead of pretending ignorance while danger watches from down the street." Vincent stared at her, moved deeply by her quiet courage and unexpected trust, despite everything she now knew about him. Before he could respond, a loud crash suddenly echoed from outside, followed immediately by shouting voices and the screech of tires. Grace's eyes widened with terror. "Ethan," she gasped, rushing toward the stairs just as gunfire erupted outside, shattering the quiet neighborhood night into chaos. Vincent moved quickly, pulling his weapon from his jacket, positioning himself protectively near the door as the sound of aggressive footsteps approached the house rapidly. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. His voice hardened with dangerous determination, ready to protect the small family that had unknowingly given him the first genuine warmth he'd felt in years. Gunfire cracked through the quiet night, shattering the calm neighborhood into chaos. Grace froze halfway up the stairs, her heart pounding with terror for her sleeping son. "Get Ethan and stay in his room, away from the windows," Vincent ordered firmly, his voice steady despite the danger unfolding outside. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." Grace nodded quickly, rushing upstairs while Vincent pulled out his phone, dialing Marco with urgent speed. "They found her house," Vincent said sharply. "Salvatore's men are outside right now. I need backup immediately." "On our way, 5 minutes out," Marco's voice replied through the phone, tension evident even through the static connection. Vincent moved carefully near the window, peering through the curtain just enough to assess the situation outside. 2 black cars were parked haphazardly on the street, for armed men taking cover behind them, firing occasional warning shots toward the house, clearly trying to intimidate rather than immediately storm inside. Upstairs, Grace held Ethan tightly in his dark bedroom, the boy trembling with confusion and fear, having been woken suddenly by the terrifying sounds. "Mom, what's happening?" Ethan whispered, his small voice shaking. "Everything's going to be okay, sweetheart," Grace whispered back. Though her own voice trembled with fear, she tried desperately to hide. "Just stay close to me, okay?" Downstairs, Vincent positioned himself carefully, his mind racing through strategies to protect the family upstairs until backup arrived. He couldn't risk stepping outside directly, not without support, yet he also couldn't allow the situation to escalate further with Grace and Ethan trapped inside. Minutes felt like hours until finally, the sound of screeching tires signaled Marco's arrival, followed quickly by an intense exchange of gunfire outside as his loyal men engaged Salvatore's forces directly. The chaotic firefight lasted only a few tense minutes before silence finally returned to the street, followed by Marco's voice calling out cautiously, "Sir, it's clear. We've secured the area." Vincent stepped outside carefully, surveying the aftermath. 2 of Salvatore's men lay wounded on the ground, quickly restrained by Marco's men, while the remaining attackers had fled into the night. Their plan clearly failed. "This won't be the last attempt," Marco warned grimly, glancing back toward the house. "Salvatore knows now that you'll fight to protect her. That makes her even more valuable to him as leverage." Vincent's jaw tightened with frustration and resolve. "Then we end this permanently. Tonight's attack proves he's growing desperate and reckless. We find his location and finish this once and for all." "What about her?" Marco asked, gesturing toward the house. Vincent hesitated only a moment before answering firmly. "She and Ethan come with us, somewhere safe, until this is completely resolved. I won't risk their safety any further." He walked back inside, climbing the stairs quickly to find Grace still holding Ethan protectively in the dark bedroom, both visibly shaken but unharmed. "It's over for tonight," Vincent said gently, kneeling down to meet their frightened eyes directly. "But I need you both to trust me a little longer. I want you somewhere safer, at least until we resolve this completely." Grace looked at him carefully, torn between fear and trust, weighing her son's safety against the danger that seemed to follow this powerful, lonely man everywhere he went. "Okay," she finally whispered, exhaustion and fear evident in her voice. "For Ethan's sake, we'll come with you." Within the hour, Grace and Ethan were safely relocated to a private, heavily guarded property Vincent owned outside the city, far removed from the immediate danger. Ethan, exhausted from the frightening night, quickly fell asleep in a comfortable guest room, while Grace sat quietly with Vincent in a small sitting area nearby, both processing the intense events of the evening. "I'm sorry," Vincent said quietly, guilt heavy in his tired voice. "I never wanted this life to touch you or Ethan." "You saved us tonight," Grace said softly, looking directly into his tired eyes. "Whatever mistakes brought this danger here, you protected us when it truly mattered." Vincent studied her carefully, moved deeply by her genuine understanding despite everything she had endured because of him. "There's something else you should know," he said slowly. We discovered something troubling earlier today. Someone close to me, someone I trusted, has been secretly feeding information to Salvatore for months. Grace's eyes widened with surprise. A traitor? Within your own organization? Vincent nodded grimly. Marco identified him just hours before the attack tonight. A man named Tony, someone who has worked alongside me for nearly a decade. Why would he betray you? Grace asked, genuinely troubled by the news. Money, most likely, Vincent said quietly. Salvatore offered him more than loyalty could resist, apparently. Tony provided information about my usual routines, my weaknesses, eventually leading Salvatore directly to you. Grace absorbed this information carefully, understanding now just how deeply complicated and dangerous Vincent's world truly was. Yet despite everything, she found herself unable to regret the kindness she had shown him that stormy night. What happens with Tony now? She asked carefully. Marco is handling it, Vincent said simply, his tone leaving little room for further questions. And tomorrow, we end this conflict with Salvatore permanently. I won't allow this danger to threaten you or Ethan any longer. Grace studied his determined expression, sensing the seriousness and finality behind his words. She reached out gently, placing her hand over his in a quiet gesture of support and trust. Be careful tomorrow, she said softly. Ethan and we need you to come back safely. Vincent looked down at her hand resting over his, warmth spreading through his chest despite the danger looming ahead. For the first time in years, he had something precious worth fighting for, worth returning safely home to. I will, he promised quietly, determination clear in his tired eyes. Tomorrow this ends, and then, perhaps, we can finally have the peaceful life you and Ethan deserve. The next morning arrived cold and clear, the storm from days earlier long gone, leaving behind a calm, gray sky. Vincent stood in his office, checking his weapon carefully, while Marco briefed him on the final plan. Salvatore is holed up in his usual warehouse near the harbor, Marco reported. Tony confessed everything last night. Salvatore's been planning to use Grace and Ethan as permanent leverage, forcing you to hand over territory and business connections you've spent years building. Vincent's expression hardened with quiet resolve. Then we make sure he never gets that chance. The men are ready, Marco confirmed. We move within the hour. Before leaving, Vincent walked to the guest room where Grace and Ethan were staying. He found Grace sitting quietly by the window, watching the morning light, worry evident in her tired eyes. You're leaving now, she said softly. Not really a question. I have to end this, Vincent said gently, kneeling beside her chair. For your safety, for Ethan's safety, and honestly, for my own peace as well. Grace reached out, gently taking his hand. Come back to us, she said quietly. Whatever happens today, come back safely. Vincent squeezed her hand gently, memorizing the warmth of her genuine concern, something he had craved for so long, without even realizing it. I promise, he said softly, before standing and walking out to face whatever awaited him. The warehouse near the harbor stood quiet and tense as Vincent's men surrounded the building carefully, cutting off every possible escape route. Inside, Salvatore paced nervously, aware his plan had unraveled following Tony's unexpected capture and confession. He knows everything, one of Salvatore's remaining men said nervously. Tony gave him our entire operation. Salvatore's face twisted with anger and desperation. Then we finished this the hard way. Gunfire erupted as Vincent's men stormed the warehouse from multiple directions, catching Salvatore's forces in a well-coordinated assault. Vincent moved carefully through the chaos, his focus entirely on ending the conflict permanently, refusing to allow any further danger to reach Grace and Ethan. Salvatore, cornered finally in a small office within the warehouse, raised his weapon shakily as Vincent entered. This ends now, Salvatore, Vincent said calmly, his own weapon steady and precise. You've gone soft, Salvatore spat bitterly, distracted by some woman and her kid. Weakness like that gets people killed in our world. No, Vincent replied firmly. It's not weakness. It's the first genuine thing I've had in years, something you'll never understand. Salvatore's hand trembled with desperation, But before he could fire, Marco's men moved in quickly from behind, disarming him completely, ending the conflict without further bloodshed. Within hours, Salvatore's organization collapsed entirely, his remaining loyal men scattering. Fearful of Vincent's now clearly demonstrated strength and resolve, the dangerous rivalry that had threatened Grace and Ethan's safety was finally, permanently resolved. That evening, Vincent returned to the private estate, exhausted but relieved, finding Grace and Ethan waiting anxiously in the living room. The moment Grace saw him walk through the door safely, relief flooded through her, tears of genuine emotion filling her eyes. "It's over," Vincent said simply, walking toward her. Grace rushed forward, embracing him tightly, unable to hold back her emotional relief any longer. Ethan joined quickly, wrapping his small arms around both of them, genuinely happy to see the man who had quickly become an important, comforting presence in his young life. "Thank you," Grace whispered softly against Vincent's shoulder, "for protecting us, for ending this danger." "Thank you," Vincent replied quietly, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes directly, "for showing me genuine kindness when I needed it most, for giving me the first real birthday I've had in years." Grace smiled gently, wiping tears from her eyes. "Speaking of birthdays," she said softly, "Ethan's actual birthday celebration is tomorrow. Perhaps this time, you could join us properly, without any storms or danger interrupting." Vincent laughed softly, genuine happiness evident for the first time in longer than he could remember. "I would like that very much." The following evening, a small, genuine birthday celebration took place, filled with laughter, simple homemade food, and warm, comfortable conversation. Ethan excitedly blew out his birthday candles, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for him, including Vincent, who found himself smiling more freely than he had in years. Later that night, once Ethan had fallen contentedly asleep, Vincent and Grace sat quietly together on the porch, watching the peaceful evening sky. "I never expected any of this," Vincent admitted quietly, wandering alone in the rain that night, feeling more isolated than ever, despite all my power and wealth. "Sometimes," Grace said softly, "the most meaningful connections happen in the most unexpected moments." Vincent turned to her, genuine warmth and gratitude clear in his expression. "You gave me something I didn't even realize I was missing. Genuine kindness, warmth, and family. I don't want to lose that now that I finally found it." Grace smiled gently, reaching for his hand once more. "You don't have to lose it, Vincent. Not if you don't want to." Vincent squeezed her hand gently, looking out at the peaceful night sky, finally feeling a sense of genuine contentment and belonging he had never truly experienced before. From that night forward, Vincent Moretti was no longer known simply as the feared, lonely mafia boss surrounded by cold ambition and empty power. He became known, quietly and genuinely, as a man who had finally found real happiness, warmth, and family, all because a kind-hearted, plus-size single mother had chosen compassion over caution one stormy, unforgettable night. And every year after that, on his birthday, candles were always lit, surrounded by genuine laughter, love, and the family he had never realized he desperately needed until Grace and Ethan welcomed him warmly into their humble, loving home.